Pleasure to be here, and thank you for coming back after the break. You noticed that we overran, so in a way, I won't take very long with my section because we've got 3 heavyweights here on the next panel. And I'm sure they would have a lot to share because some of them have traveled from very far. What I've done the last year, whilst Martin and my other senior colleague Tony have been doing these young leaders training, is to focus on the applied research that ISL wanted to do. So I'm just going to be introducing to you 3 papers that we've made available from on our website, the last of which has actually been printed for you. So if you'd really like to take a copy, please do so at break time. Basically, what we've set out to do is to try and figure out what societal leadership can mean for those on the ground, rather than to come up with a theory to test it from where we are at the university end. So these are the 3 papers that I'll just quickly introduce for those of you who are more academic inclined and you want to look at a serious paper provided on our website. But the first paper really sets out to understand societal leadership, more from the impact that leaders have created on the ground, as well as the strategy that they've used to create that social impact. So the paper is actually based on conversations with over 200 social impact organizations that we've met when we travel each of the Southeast Asian countries, each Southeast Asian country, and the interviews that we've had, a more serious sort of sit-down interview that we've had with 80 senior societal leaders, social catalysts, and social innovators. We've realized a few things. One is that societal leaders can come from any sector. It can be an individual, it can be a business, it can be a government division or unit, it can be an organization that is set up for that purpose. The approach that they have for those who've made impact and for those of whom we've been very impressed with, the approach is really for the people and by the people. It's never from a self-generated agenda that is self-centered. The attitude is also one with a long-term commitment to the place that they've set up with the aim of equipping locals to be their own societal leaders in time to come. And the focus we found for each of them is a specific social issue in a community that's targeted at the most vulnerable within that community, but to leverage other social benefits that might be useful for that community. And the engagement we've also observed is very much characterized by harnessing existing support systems, incentivizing partners to provide better services, and to take responsibility for particular issues. So some of these have been very successful working with governments, such as government divisions within a certain district or village, some with businesses that have got a strong social sense of responsibility. The next, so that paper is available if you want to really look into the examples that we've cited and the people who've been doing good in the region, the social innovators and catalysts. I'd just like to quickly move on to the second piece of research, and this is my favorite because we've spent the last year doing 31 interviews with very senior societal leaders. And what we wanted, as Martin said, is to collect their story of leadership challenges, leadership moments, traits that they admired in the people they've worked with, who I'm sure were leaders in their eyes, and then traits that we've found coming from their own stories that really distinguished them as special people and people with a very strong sense of purpose. These are the interviews that we've completed, you know, the likes of President Fidel Ramos, our own Mr. S.R. Nathan. We've got social activists. We have got people in the business sector. A lot of the Indonesians are business tycoons with very strong work ethic, business ethics. We have former Prime Minister Chuan Lik Pai of Thailand, Malaysian counterparts. We've got 2 social activists also from Cambodia, Timor-Leste, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Jose Ramos Horta. Every country was covered just for this first year, and we were going to be doing a lot more. So what we've tried to do is using NVivo, which is a qualitative research software, work through each of the transcripts, and I've picked the first 20 that we did. So out of the first 20, I went through the transcripts to do the coding on some of the traits that came through that is common amongst the leaders. So I'm just going to show you 4 of the top clusters of traits that were common amongst the 20 that we've analyzed. The first is the sense of single-mindedness and drive that we found. 101 mentions across 20 interviews. What do we mean by single-mindedness and drive? We broke it down to things like persistence and fortitude, traits like the ability to inspire and lead, a decisiveness and a firmness when they make decisions, and the courage of conviction to drive through and to finish what they've set out to do. So I've got some of these examples in the paper just to back up what we picked out. The second cluster or traits cluster would be the strategic mindset. They were adept at strategy. You can't have a great vision and no strategy or no sort of wherewithal to see it through. So we found that these leaders had very practical mindsets, and they took the long view. They weren't there for the short haul. They had a longer plan in mind, and they were very grounded. They were where the people were. So if you look at someone like President Fidel Ramos, working with the soldiers in the South, he made sure that there was a plan to provide an alternative livelihood for them so that the dignity is kept up. They weren't there to just ask them to surrender their arms, for a peace treaty. We also had Mr. Saranathan telling us that the founding leaders were those who listened, and they were also always one step ahead of the rest. The third traits cluster that we've picked out, 66 mentions across 20 interviews, values-driven and being principled. What do we mean by that? A strong sense of justice. Putting the country before self, and strong work ethic. We have someone like Kartini Mujadi, who is a judge, a woman judge in Indonesia, saying that they've experienced a lot of acts of injustice in their day. And so when they had the chance to make a difference, they just want to make sure they can secure justice for their own people, especially in countries which were trying to build their nation, countries which had been, of course, colonized, and countries which had actually been run by people who were natives. The last one, which I'll just point out, is humble disposition. We found that, of course, humility can mean a lot of things in different countries, in different social contexts, Western, Eastern. But it encompasses things like being modest in behavior, the ability to see things in perspective, being very open-minded to hear different views. Some of them, of course, had humble starts to their life, right? They lived in situations where they were the oppressed, they had colonizers, they felt that, they weren't really owning their own land. But more importantly, they were open to understanding what people want. Remember, Arnold talked about listening? Yeah, so this is it. Listening and knowing what people want and not working against the aspirations and the longings of the people. And there's some of these. Kokogi was, for our Myanmar colleagues here, he was in prison for a long stretch of his life. But he persisted. He felt that it was a sacrifice worth it because it didn't mean a sacrifice for his own family. It was for him an investment in the future of the country, speaking up for carrying on with the activist work that he was doing. Okay, so these are the 4 key clusters. We understand, of course, that these have to work within the context. There is a cultural philosophy, there is a religious sort of moral principle that each of them would have kept to because of the country they were in and the time they were in. These people also were very sensitive to social norms and the aspirations of the people. So this paper is available if you want to really go more into detail. The last bit that Martin has been alluding to is we've completed reports on each of the Southeast Asian countries. And we have got one each on our website if you want to look at it. But the compilation is available for you, and we've printed it out as a monograph. A compilation of the insights from each of the countries in terms of giving you a sense of the landscape of the country and the key challenges of each. But overall, we pull out common insights, which we hope will be picked up by a lot of our panelists later to elaborate as well as to validate for us in the days, in the hours ahead and for tomorrow. The challenges that the civil society organizations have told us that they faced. One is politicization. I mean, they could be set up to serve the community, but because of the politics and the government They could be seen as not on the government side, and that is when they get into trouble because the government would then create their own NGO and have people support the government-backed ones instead. They also come up with a lot of bureaucracy because of government administration in some of the countries that require them to fill in a lot of forms and pay a lot of money for experts to help them fill in the forms before they are endorsed as an organization. And of course, a lot of them try and play in between that tenuous relationship with the government. Some of them would rather not be on the radar of the government in case they get exploited to pay more taxes or to create sort of alternative channels for the funds that come in. Key constraints that they face, especially in the area of funding, included some of these. In small countries like Brunei, for instance, you find that they're tapping the same source of donors. I mean, how many corporates are there and how many international organizations are there to fund, certain charities? So they rely on the same things like charity drives, golf and all that, but, they find that the pool is drying up. Also, with the financial crisis that we've experienced in the last decade or so, they found that the funds are also drying up from people who would directly pay to support a cause. We have got some experts here who will, at the forums, the panels later on, tell us about the newer waves of impact investors as well as venture philanthropists and what they're asking for, rather than have people donate directly to causes with no accountability or no return on investment expectations. The constraints face also reliance on patronage, especially in a place like Malaysia. Reputational risk due to politics, as I've mentioned, especially for NGOs that are closely associated with political leaders, and when these leaders get into trouble, the whole sort of community of NGOs get black-marked as well. And some NGOs find there are limits to impacts because of government constraints and restrictions. So they can only work on little areas, especially in Cambodia where there's so many NGOs, you find that they can't aggregate for greater impact. They can only deal with the little areas they are given the space to function in. As I think Ho Kwon Ping mentioned earlier on too, the rise of social entrepreneurs. We are seeing a rise of people, young people especially, who are very interested to go into the social business and not just setting up NGOs. In some places, these are seen to be more acceptable than NGOs because they're not challenging governments. They're seen as businesses, and they're seen as more in the science and tech area, and so it's not posed as a constraint to government sort of efforts or government efforts at assuring people that everything is in control. We see also a population that is more keen on supporting local products, and I think GK will be able to back this up, that there are more people willing to pay more for products that are associated with social enterprise. What they need, they tell us, still alternative revenue streams, because you can't do a social sort of concern without a strong business model, and that has always been a tussle for social entrepreneurs. They do ask if they could get more training in managerial skills, business skills, and they see the language competency as a barrier when they want to try and pass on the skills to the locals. So this is a quick summary, and the last slide I would say here is there is a call for more cross-sector collaboration, stronger government administration, and less bureaucracy, better public education so that you've got more people who are skilled to provide and to contribute to that work in the community, better infrastructure, especially for transportation of goods, and a banking sector that supports what people are trying to do in the region, stronger application of innovation, and possibly mentorship of social sector leaders. And I think some of our panelists are going to be talking about that, the work that they're doing with NGOs. So this is the cover of the monograph that you can pick up on your way out. Thank you very much.